Hello. So I will be talking about Klees's 6 issues that he believes are the priorities of global development efforts, and I will be explaining whether I agree or disagree and which one of these priorities is most important. So Steve Klees basically talks about how we need to gravitate away from the neoliberal ideas of scholars like Bauer and Moyo, these ideas of a confidence in the free hand and the market economy, and he suggests moving towards a more radical, what he calls progressive model. There were a couple in-between scholars, but for the most part he emphasizes a departure from neoliberal thinking in order to do what he outlines are the most important development efforts, and they are impacting the poor, emphasizing gender, going to scale, considering the environment, paying attention to issues of peace and conflict, and using a human rights framework. So I agree with this in theory, but I think where Klees loses me is in practice. So there are several other scholars that responded to Klees' article, and they just brought up some pretty important ideas. I'll essentially just be echoing one of them because I agree with their criticism. I think the article that's most aligned with what I think is the Bremen-Solova article entitled The Ignorant Donor, where essentially they point out that Klees is proposing new ideas but on old foundations, and that development in general perpetuates an allegory of inequality as there's no challenge to linear progress. They talk about this on page 29 and 30. They emphasize it's a different method with the same vision, or most specifically a logic of rescue, in which the Western world presupposes that their help is needed, that the helped are helpless, and that the West knows the right way to help. He said that development begins with a philosophical starting point of inequality, and we see equality as something that is achieved, not practiced. He talks about these on page 31 and 32. That there is a gap, or an assumed gap, between the knowledgeable and the unintelligent, and that they argue that the very attempt to suppress the distance between the knowledgeable and the unintelligent in the name of equality actually perpetuates inequality. We create a hierarchy. We don't view these people as equals. We view them as victims. It's paternalistic. Brehm suggests that in order to truly do good, we need to view equality as the starting point. He says this on page 32. We need to view these people as capable equals that are capable of making decisions about their own lives. Brennan Solova emphasized that we need to respect the decisions made locally and reposition our responsibility for re-envisioning someone else's future, and then essentially just create the circumstances for opportunity and accept the various unique outcomes. I think if we can do that first and then institute Klees' 6 principles, that there is actually a possibility of good coming from development. But I think until we dismantle this tired and antiquated framework of rescue logic, that we're just wasting our time. Equality needs to be a means, not an end, and a practice, not an achievement. I think then this would be a true representation of Klees' human rights framework, which, if we actually were to define it in the way of viewing all global participants as equally capable of ascertaining skills and becoming masters of their own lives, they're equally intelligent and so forth, that then I would argue that that's the most important bullet point on the list. I feel like all the others are almost subheadings to that one, and they're moot if we can't agree on the point of people starting with equality. As a small aside, I actually noticed huge parallels to this in the way that we treat urban students in the United States. I've noticed programs like Teach for America and many other organizations that are set to do good view these kids as suffering and incapable victims that we should be saving rather than the bright, capable, and brilliant students that they are. And study after study shows that teachers that enter classrooms with these attitudes, they often hamper their students' progress to do their best because they're more often than not totally capable students, and we're just viewing them as having deficits as opposed to viewing them as equals. It's the same concept, just here. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'm going to go back to studying for our quiz.